Tom Harris had always kept his yard immaculate. Every morning he mowed the lawn, trimmed the hedges, and even polished the mailbox, which had become a strange symbol of a long-running feud with the HOA president, Linda. For months she had been targeting him with petty violations, nitpicking everything from the angle of his driveway lights to the spacing of his flower beds. But the mailbox had become the ultimate battleground. It started innocently enough. A simple wooden post in his front yard. Tom had chosen a classic design, sturdy and functional. But Linda had deemed it not compliant with neighborhood aesthetics and took it upon herself to enforce the rules. She smashed it repeatedly, sometimes leaving threatening notes in his mailbox, or what was left of it, warning him to follow the guidelines or face consequences. Neighbors whispered about the absurdity of the feud, some shaking their heads, others secretly siding with Tom, who had endured months of harassment without retaliating. On this particular morning, Tom walked to retrieve the mail and froze. The mailbox was lying in pieces again. Splinters littered the ground, and the post had been yanked almost entirely out of the soil. He noticed faint tire marks nearby and smelled the unmistakable trace of paint thinner. His suspicions were immediately confirmed. Linda had struck again. "Unbelievable," Tom muttered, crouching to examine the damage. "Every time I fix it, she comes back." But Tom had a plan this time. Over the past week, he had replaced the old mailbox with a reinforced steel version, hidden under the same familiar wood finish. It was weighted, anchored with concrete, and designed to withstand heavy blows. Tom had even set it slightly off-center so that any direct attack would require precision or else risk collateral damage. He had a feeling Linda wouldn't resist. As expected, later that afternoon, Linda arrived in her shiny new SUV. She parked recklessly near the driveway, muttering under her breath, clipboard in hand. Neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, sensing that something was about to happen. Linda approached the mailbox, her face twisted with determination. She lifted her fist, ready to smash it like before. Tom watched from his kitchen window, careful not to reveal himself too soon. The first strike hit the reinforced wood. There was a loud clang as the metal inside absorbed the force, sending a shock straight back. Linda stumbled slightly, but she wasn't deterred. Then came the mistake. The mailbox's slight off-center alignment caused her to overreach. When she swung again, the metal plate caught the corner of her SUV. A deafening screech filled the air as metal met metal, followed by a sharp thud. She froze, staring at her car. The bumper was dented, the hood scratched, and a few paint chips glistened in the sunlight. Her carefully maintained SUV had suffered serious damage. Damage caused entirely by her own aggression. Neighbors spilled onto the street, whispering and pointing. Tom stepped outside, hands in his pockets, pretending calm, while a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Everything all right, Linda?" he asked innocently. Linda whirled toward him, red-faced. "This is outrageous! You're going to pay for this!" Tom raised a hand. "I just installed a new mailbox. That's it. You chose to attack it. You might want to check your car before smashing other people's property next time." The absurdity of the situation dawned on her as she examined the damage. Her fury was palpable, but the reality was unavoidable. She had destroyed her own vehicle while trying to harass Tom. Tom, meanwhile, calmly took out his phone and snapped photos of both the mailbox and the damaged SUV. He knew the HOA would try to manipulate the narrative, so he documented everything meticulously. Angles, close-ups, timestamps, and the street view with neighbors watching. Neighbors whispered among themselves, amazed at the irony. Some had been intimidated by Linda before, but now, seeing her miscalculated attempt backfire so dramatically, they couldn't help but smile. One elderly neighbor muttered, "Finally, some justice." Linda's phone rang, It was her insurance company. Her attempts to explain the situation were awkward at best. Yes, I accidentally damaged my own car while trying to enforce property rules, she stammered. Realizing how ridiculous she sounded, Tom stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough so the nearby neighbors could hear. Linda, maybe next time you want to enforce rules, you should consider the consequences first. She clenched her fists, muttered something under her breath, and stormed back to her SUV. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The mailbox had survived, standing tall, while the expensive car of the aggressor now bore the evidence of her misjudgment. As she drove off, Tom noticed a few neighbors giving him thumbs up. One waved, shaking her head. "I've never seen anything like this. That's some clever thinking, Tom." Tom smiled faintly, feeling a sense of satisfaction. For months, he had endured harassment without retaliation, documenting each incident carefully. This time, he had allowed the situation to resolve itself naturally. Patience, preparation, and a little strategic design had done what months of arguments could not. Inside, Tom felt a renewed sense of peace. The mailbox, unbroken and resilient, now symbolized his ability to stand up for himself without stooping to anger or violence. The HOA, and Linda in particular, had been reminded that authority had limits and that underestimating a neighbor came at a cost. He made a mental note to continue monitoring his property and documenting any further incidents. While he had won this round, the HOA's habit of overreach suggested that future attempts were possible. But Tom was confident. He had learned to combine patience, planning, and clever defenses to protect his property. And next time, he might even be more inventive. The day ended with Tom standing by his mailbox, taking in the quiet street, the curious neighbors, and the lingering tension in the air. It was a small victory, but a satisfying one. Linda's attempts to intimidate had failed spectacularly, and for once, the tables had been turned in a way everyone could see. The next morning, Tom woke up early, still savoring the victory of the previous day. He brewed a strong cup of coffee and walked out to check his mailbox once more. It was unscathed, standing firm against the repeated attempts of harassment. He couldn't help but smile. Linda's aggression had literally backfired, and now it was a visible lesson for the entire street. Soon, neighbors began approaching him. Mrs. Reynolds from across the street said, "Tom, that was brilliant. I can't believe she actually damaged her own car. I never thought we'd see the day." Tom nodded. "I didn't want to escalate, but I also couldn't just keep replacing the mailbox endlessly. Sometimes, the best solution is letting the situation correct itself." Word of the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some of the HOA board members tried to downplay it, claiming that the incident was unfortunate and a coincidence. But the photos, the dented SUV, and the eyewitness accounts told a different story. Linda had humiliated herself, and her own actions were undeniable. Tom decided to take the next step. He submitted a formal complaint to the HOA board, including photos, timestamps, and even a brief video showing the mailbox's reinforced design and the positioning of her car. The HOA had no choice but to review the complaint seriously. Within days, Linda was summoned for a meeting with the board. She entered, visibly flustered, trying to maintain some semblance of authority. "This is ridiculous," she began, but no one interrupted her yet. Tom presented his documentation calmly, explaining each incident of harassment and how her actions had escalated into property damage for herself. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had tolerated her behavior for months, but now the evidence was overwhelming. Linda's arrogance and recklessness were laid bare. After a tense discussion, the board decided to reprimand her formally and implement a policy to prevent such overreach in the future. Meanwhile, Tom continued to take precautions. He installed additional security cameras, set up motion-sensitive lighting, and even reinforced other vulnerable parts of his property. It wasn't paranoia. After months of harassment, it was practical foresight. Neighbors started approaching him with stories of how Linda had previously intimidated them or tried to enforce petty rules unfairly. Tom listened, offered advice, and encouraged them to document every interaction. His own experience had shown that careful planning and evidence could protect not just him, but the entire community. Weeks later, Linda attempted a weak comeback, trying to argue that the mailbox incident was an accident and that Tom had somehow provoked it. Tom calmly presented the sequence of events once again, showing that her aggressive actions had caused the damage entirely. Linda's excuses fell flat, and the HOA board sided with Tom, reinforcing the message that harassment and intimidation would not be tolerated. The mailbox remained intact, a small but powerful symbol of resilience. Tom's reputation in the neighborhood had shifted. Neighbors no longer whispered about the petty feud with concern, but with admiration for how he had handled it. The incident also served as a warning to anyone considering overstepping boundaries. Misjudging a prepared and patient neighbor could have consequences far worse than they imagined. Tom reflected on the whole experience while sitting in his yard one evening. It wasn't about revenge, he thought. It was about standing my ground, being prepared, and letting the truth reveal itself. That's all it ever had to be. Linda eventually left the neighborhood in frustration, realizing that her attempts at control had only exposed her own recklessness. The HOA, chastened by the public exposure and Tom's meticulous documentation, implemented stricter rules for board members and limits on property inspections. Tom's mailbox, finally free from repeated attacks, became a symbol, not of conflict, but of clever planning, patience, and standing up to abuse without stooping to it. For him, it was a reminder that preparation, foresight, and calm action could turn even the most absurd harassment into a victory. The neighbors, once quietly frustrated by the HOA's power, now felt empowered. They realized that rules could be enforced fairly, and that no single person could intimidate a community if others were prepared to act responsibly. Tom's actions had set a precedent. Petty aggression meets consequences, and patience coupled with strategy wins in the long run. By the end of the month, life in the neighborhood returned to a calmer rhythm. The mailbox stood tall, the SUV was repaired at Linda's expense, and Tom's measured approach had restored both his property and his peace of mind. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It's completely free and really helps this channel stay alive. Thank you for your support.